Drug Smarts.
Okay, so we're going to be speaking today with Dr. Jeffrey Michael Strong. He is a naturopathic doctor and the Director of Scientific Communications for Horphag Research Limited. Now, I should put an asterisk probably right up front that Horphag Research Limited is in fact the manufacturer and distributor to the world of Pycnogenol. They have pycnogenol.com as one of their domain names, among other things. So, whereas a lot of the researchers that we talk with on this show are working for universities and academic institutions and aren't necessarily tied up so directly in the retail world of pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals, Dr. Strong does work for a company that sells the very thing we're going to be talking about, which isn't to impugn his credibility or anything like that, but I think it is important to be aware of these sorts of things, and I'm going to try to be even more cognizant of that in the future, just kind of as we talk about different chemicals or technologies with guests who might have a financial stake in one thing or another, trying to bring that right out in the open whenever that's something that happens. So Pycnogenol, if you've heard of it before, you've probably heard of it in the context of antioxidation. For probably about the past 20 years, one of the main things that people are thinking about as a cause of aging and general cellular wear and tear within the body is something called oxidative stress. Obviously, if you remember even high school chemistry classes, oxidation is a chemical process that happens all the time within the cells of our body as different things get rearranged, broken down, energy released, things like that. So it's not like you can fully stop oxidative processes within your body. You wouldn't want to, you'd be dead. But the downside of some of these processes is the creation of things called free radicals, which to a certain extent can run amok within the body and cause secondary downstream reactions that you don't want to have happen. Anyway, long story short, antioxidants are things that we get within our diet which help damper down the negative effects of oxidative stress. So Pycnogenol is known to be quite a powerful antioxidant, and if you've seen it on the shelves in your health food store or heard it advertised, that's probably the context you've heard about it in. However, we're talking about it on this show because of the cognitive benefits that seem to also result from the use of Pycnogenol. We're going to start off with a general overview of the chemical, where it comes from and what it can do, but pay particular attention to the cognitive end of things, which is mostly in the second half of the interview. And with that as preamble, Dr. Jeffrey Strong. Tell us about the history of Pycnogenol.
Originally, Pycnogenol, well, it's derived from a very specific, unique tree, which is the French maritime pine tree, which grows only in the southwest corner of France, just above the Spanish border there. The maritime pine tree grows all around the world, but this is a very unique region where you had a lot of factors that went into play. You had, salt water from the ocean coming into the land, and it was a very marshy area historically, and very, very poor area because nothing would grow because there was just too high mineral content in the soil and too much water around, basically. And during the time of Napoleon III, the French government wanted to develop some form of industry for the people in the area. And so they started planting this maritime pine tree there. For whatever reason, this pine tree really took to the area. And now it's one of the largest forests in Europe. Well, what made it interesting, though, is that over time, it became very clear that this species of trees was diverging from your typical maritime pine tree. If you look at the maritime pine trees, even just down the way in Spain and other parts of Europe, you look at the bark thickness, and the bark thickness is on average of around 2 centimeters. But if you look at the average bark thickness of the French maritime pine tree, it's about double that, of around 4 centimeters. So very obvious physical difference right there. And then if you look at the quality of the bark, it's very, very deep red in color, even when you break it off and look at the inside. So it shows just even in the natural bark form that it has a very high concentration of these polyphenol compounds, of these organic acids that are the active components of Pycnogenol. But even in the bark, it's a very high concentration. So it's the bark of this tree from which Pycnogenol is extracted.
How did people first get an inkling that there was something worth extracting here?
Well, it was interesting because it came across a researcher in France who had a hobby, more or less, of reading old explorers' diaries. So these were like, in the old times with the wooden ships, the sail to America, trying to find the way to India, right? Mm-hmm. And there was an explorer called Jacques Cartier who, during the 1500s, got stuck in Canada in the wintertime. And his team started to come down with scurvy because they ran out of fresh vegetables and were running out of vitamin C in their diets. It was during this time that they met some of the Native Americans living in this part of Canada, and they came to the rescue of Jacques Cartier and his team. And what they did was they gave him a tea that was prepared from the bark and from pine needles. And there's a small amount of vitamin C in pine needles, but there's a very, very high concentration of these polyphenol compounds in the bark. Basically, the story is that almost everyone in the crew was saved as a result of just taking this tea. And this French researcher found this story, and it was kind of, like a aha moment to him that there's something good here that needs to be explored. And so he started doing research, trying to figure out what exactly is in the pine bark. And this was not very long after, the polyphenols had been originally discovered. He found that the pine bark was a concentrated source for these many different polyphenol compounds. Most abundantly are what they call very specific one particular type of proanthocyanidin, which is called a procyanidin. And a very high concentration of these with many different organic acids as well in there. If you consider what scurvy is basically a disease where it's due to a deficiency in vitamin C. But what happens when you run out of vitamin C is that your body cannot produce collagen. As a result of this, of course, your skin is the first thing you think of when you run out of collagen. Your skin's going to look terrible. And yes, that will be true, but it's not going to kill you. With scurvy, the problem is that our blood vessels are also made up of about 60% collagen. And so the body's not able to repair the blood vessels. And soon the blood vessels become weak. And in the case of scurvy, people die because their blood vessels break down and they bleed to death, basically. The researcher making this connection to scurvy, they started doing research into blood vessel health with this extract from the French maritime pine tree. They found that it was an excellent, what they call a vasotonic. It strengthened the integrity of the blood vessels. The research developing Pycnogenol was in full force in the 1960s, and it was originally launched as a pharmaceutical product to improve blood vessel health in the sense of making the blood vessels stronger and also enhancing blood flow. In 1967 in France, it was originally launched.
And at that point, it was a prescription-only drug.
At that point, yes. It is still used as a pharmaceutical, mainly for this same purpose, for strengthening blood vessels and for heart health. Originally, it was developed as a pharmaceutical product only, and it was sold in numerous countries only as a pharmaceutical product. But then in the 1980s, there were changes in the regulations in relation to these type of products. What I mean by that is this is a natural plant extract, and it has a very, very high, strong safety record. And with extracts from natural source that have not shown any problems with safety, they were allowed to be used as health food supplement ingredients. With this change in the regulations, Pycnogenol was then began to be sold as a health food ingredient, which it is most commonly sold as today. There was more interest in research of what else Pycnogenol could do, and it was found that in the early 1990s that it happened to be a very, very potent antioxidant. It really grew in popularity and awareness in the 1990s.
That was when antioxidation kind of came into the popular literature and people started knowing what that actually even meant.
Yes, and it was found to be one of the most powerful natural antioxidant substances. And since then, it was found that Pycnogenol, in addition to enhancing blood vessel health and blood flow, super antioxidant potential, and then it also has anti-inflammatory activity, which has been significant enough to show that it's able to relieve pain in like menstrual pain, even to the point of dysmenorrhea, or in the case of arthritis, joint pain. So it has a nice anti-inflammatory action as well.
If you Google Pycnogenol, the number of things that it is recommended as possible cures or at least salves for is just all across the board. Everything from athletic performance to circulation to mental clarity and memory to erectile dysfunction to just all sorts of different things. If you had to broadly categorize where it's used most often now, where would you say?
In the United States, again, since it was originally developed with the antioxidant boom, I think it's still most well known as a super antioxidant there. It's interesting, it kind of depends on the country in the market. However, there's been a lot more expansion of marketing for Pycnogenol based on the research that has come up. So you will see a lot more targeted formulations, say, for cognitive function, but also for women's health in the case of menstrual pain and these types of things. Pycnogenol is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all for everything. But when you think about what it does, it supports human health on a very basic foundational level with improving antioxidant status of the body. That alone has a very good anti-aging effect by decreasing free radical stress in the body. It is a very potent anti-inflammatory and reducing inflammation. There are many conditions that inflammation is a big part of. And so you can see relief of symptoms with many different conditions based on its anti-inflammatory action. And then, of course, improving circulation, blood vessel health, and blood vessel function. That is obviously vital for any kind of heart health related condition. Through these three actions alone, you see Pycnogenol supporting a very foundational level of our health. And that's why you see it used with and showing good efficacy with so many different conditions that have been supported by the research. So
one counterindication I saw was for people that have autoimmune problems, that because of some of the benefits to strengthening the immune system, if you have any of these conditions where your immune system is actually attacking your own body, Pycnogenol could do something bad, could work in the opposite direction by strengthening those attacks of the body on itself. Can you talk a little about that?
In my opinion, I think there's a little bit of a gap in the research here related to this, the use of Pycnogenol in autoimmune conditions. So, I mean, until further research can be done to clarify that, maybe it's good to be cautious in these people. But I think it could also have a significant benefit because when you think about an autoimmune condition, basically it's a chronic inflammatory condition where the body's own immune system is attacking itself. So it's a double-edged sword. Pycnogenol could be working both ways here, and maybe there needs to be more research related to that. But I've heard reports of people who have rheumatic arthritis who have found significant relief when they take Pycnogenol. So I think a little bit more exploration needs to be done here.
Are there any other dietary sources or ways that Pycnogenol might make its way into a person other than this derived extract?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you don't see a lot of people munching on pine bark in their diet, but the compounds that are found in Pycnogenol can actually be found in various foods. There's no one food that contains all the compounds of Pycnogenol in that one simple food source. But for the polyphenol compounds, the procyanidins and things, you can find some of these mainly in the skins of various fruits. You can find polyphenols in good concentration here. Of course, you will find a whole broad range of polyphenols in these fruits, whereas Pycnogenol is a very high concentrated source of the procyanidins. But within this, you can find it in fruits, vegetables, also nuts are good sources of these organic acids that can be found in Pycnogenol. And even one special compound that can be in high concentration in pine bark, which is called ferulic acid, that's also found in small amounts in vegetables like red onions. So there are food sources for the compounds in Pycnogenol, but it's very difficult to get them in a high concentrated source like you can get from taking one capsule of Pycnogenol containing product.
So for this audience, I think the cognitive benefits that can be gotten out of any supplement are going to be what's most interesting. Can you talk a little about the studies that have involved cognition?
Yeah, there's some very cool stuff that the research trail for Pycnogenol related cognition has come a long way. It's been going on for over 20 years. Initially, it all stemmed from reports in the United States of physicians that were using Pycnogenol to treat children with ADHD back in the mid-1990s. And we started getting these reports that were popping up, physicians that were finding very good success in relieving symptoms of hyperactivity and improving the ability of these children to concentrate with this natural compound. So there was a lot of interest there. And then this was followed up with similar reports coming out of Japan. And so it came to the point that, we really need to do a study on this. And so the first study was done in children with ADHD, and it was initially announced at the International Conference on Polyphenols in Helsinki in 2004. But what they found was that basically these children taking Pycnogenol compared to placebo, they performed much better. Their ability to pay attention improved significantly, as well as their hyperactivity scores improved significantly. So this was one of the first actual, double-blind placebo-controlled studies that showed that, yes, Pycnogenol is having a significant effect at improving cognition, at least in these children with ADHD. And then after this, the research related to menopause, a study in menopausal women. One of the symptoms that commonly occurs with menopause is a decrease in the ability to concentrate, and memory problems are quite common with many women going through menopause. This was one of course, the symptoms that were investigated in this study. This was a 6-month-long study, 200 women involved, double-blind, placebo-controlled study done in Taiwan. And they found that after 6 months of taking Pycnogenol, that there was 55% improvement in memory function.
55% sounds really, really dramatic.
It was very dramatic. And they were taking a high dose. I will admit it was 200 milligrams a day that these women were on. They also had a significant improvement in their ability to concentrate. Concentration problems decreased greater than 30% was reported in the publication on this study. And at the same time, there was a research project going on down in Australia. This was a study done in elderly individuals. Now, these were healthy elderly individuals. There was 101 elderly subjects in the study. They were aged 68 to 82, I believe it was. And they were taking Pycnogenol or placebo over the course of 3 months. And they used standardized cognitive function assessment tests, which are basically done through a computer battery of tests. Basically, what they found was over 3 months' time, with placebo, there was minimal change of only 1.2% improvement, which was not significant at all. Whereas with Pycnogenol group, the memory function score after 3 months of continued intake significantly improved. And associated with this, they also wanted to try and find out what one of the possible mechanisms may be. And again, here they investigated the antioxidant function, and they looked at one metabolite of oxidized lipids, which is called the F2 isoprostanes. And of course, the brain, with all the myelin sheath that surrounds our neurons, has a very low tolerance for free radical stress. When this free radical stress is high and the myelin sheath gets damaged as a result of this, this is believed to be one of the factors that contributes to this cognitive decline with age. They found that there was a very significant reduction in the amount of these oxidized lipid metabolites that were being seen. It reduced 23% over 3 months with taking Pycnogenol. So very good results there. One of the things we want to look at here is how we can improve quality of life, improve brain function, basically cognitive function in already healthy people. Is this possible with Pycnogenol? So this study basically involved college students, the average age of around 23. There was a control group and a Pycnogenol group, and they took a whole battery of tests. This was an 8-week-long study. The people in the Pycnogenol group were taking 100 milligrams of Pycnogenol a day. They did, again, a whole battery of cognitive function tests, tests for memory, tests for what they call mental flexibility. At the end of 8 weeks, they found that the cognitive function improved significantly in the students who were taking Pycnogenol. Particularly, there is a test called the Paced Auditory Serial Addition. It's a test where a number is given, and you have to remember that number, and then 1.5 to 2 seconds later, another number is said, and you have to add these in your head, and the process continues until there is a mistake made. Basically, the subjects taking Pycnogenol, they had a greater than 50% improvement in their ability to conduct this test. For memory recall, picture recall, they had a greater than 35% improvement here. And for logical function planning skill test, there is a test which is called the Stockings of Cambridge, out of Cambridge University. And their improvement in the ability to conduct this test, they improved by greater than 20% here as well. And then they also did another more subjective aspect to the study, was that they gave them a survey to ask them about their mood and their energy level, these types of things. They found that compared to the control group, that after taking Pycnogenol for 8 weeks, there was a significant improvement in the feeling of alertness. This was accompanied by a significant decrease in feelings of anxiety and a greater feeling of what they call contentedness or satisfaction with where they are in their life. So this was quite interesting too. The improvement in cognitive function, obviously this is affecting them on an emotional level, improving their alertness, nothing like too much caffeine, which will get you jumpy or anything like that, but the nice solid ability to concentrate improved, and that was clear with the test scores in this study.
What's the assumed mechanism of action for the cognitive benefits that we've talked about?
Pycnogenol significantly has been shown in numerous studies to improve the function of the blood vessels and help to lower blood pressure, which is also a negative factor in cognition as people age. So improving blood flow to the brain, of course, decreasing free radical stress in the brain, and decreasing inflammation in the brain. And I keep saying in the brain because there was a very interesting study that was published in the journal PLOS ONE in April of 2013. And this was research that's being done at the University of Würzburg in Germany. Basically, what they're looking at with pycnogenol is, was there any chance that these metabolites of pycnogenol were somehow being actively taken up into specific cells in the body, and therefore having a more effective action within these cells. What they found in this research, which was very cool, was that one specific metabolite of pycnogenol, it's a valorolactone compound, was shown to be actively taken up into red blood cells. So what we're seeing here is that these metabolites of pycnogenol are being carried and transported through the body in the red blood cells, which means they pass directly into the brain by virtue of this through the blood-brain barrier, which makes it kind of a new exciting dimension as to how pycnogenol is having these effects and improving cognitive function.
So let me ask you this. You've listed a ton of great things about this substance. Where's the flip side? Where's the smudge on the silver lining?
The flip side of this, areas where it has really not been researched in or not shown good efficacy, I guess would be within intestinal health, for improving the intestinal environment. There's research lacking here, and there's not much to indicate that it would be that significant at improving intestinal health.
What would happen if one overdosed on pycnogenol?
We haven't really heard of an overdose situation with pycnogenol in the 40-plus years it's been on the market. These compounds, again, they're all found in different food sources. So to our body, they're not foreign. They're not considered toxic or dangerous substances to our body. Again, anything that we take, if you take it in excess, you can expect that there may be some ill effect from something. So far to date, we haven't seen any type of overdose symptoms with the dose that humans can or would typically consume. There's been research studies with heart disease patients with coronary artery disease where they were given a dose of 450 milligrams per day. And there was no significant increase in any type of side effect reports with this study. What you can see with pycnogenol, particularly if you were to take it on an empty stomach, this is a natural extract that's a very high concentration of polyphenols with organic acids as well. So it can be very acidic in that sense, in that it can stimulate the lining of the stomach and be irritating to the lining of the stomach for some people on an empty stomach.
For yourself, your family, your loved ones, how much pycnogenol do you take per day?
I take every day 100 milligrams, and then there are days where I'm more active. If I'm exercising more or, it's a very stressful day, then I will double it up to 200 milligrams at times. My wife also takes 100 milligrams per day. I even give it to my children, particularly when they get sick, if they have a cold, or my son sometimes develop a little bit of asthma-like symptoms. And during that time, I give it to him. And with the anti-inflammatory action, it really helps to improve his breathing and relieve the symptoms there. So my whole family's been taking it for years now. And we're still here and still doing well.